On the morning of March 17th, 1644, outside the village of Newark-on-Trent in Nottinghamshire, England, parliamentary soldiers discovered something that would haunt their nightmares for years to come. Amid the bodies of fallen royalist cavalry, they found the mutilated remains of 3 villagers, a miller, his wife, and their young daughter. Their throats had been torn open. Their bodies showed signs of being hunted, chased through the winter fields like prey. The wounds were unlike anything the battle-hardened soldiers had seen. These were not sword cuts or musket injuries. These were the marks of teeth, large teeth, canine teeth. Standing guard over one of the bodies, its white coat matted with blood, was a poodle, not cowering, not fleeing. Watching them with what the soldiers would later describe as an intelligence most unnatural. The dog wore a jeweled collar bearing the crest of Prince Rupert of the Rhine. But the truth was far more terrifying than a simple war dog gone feral. Before we uncover the truth about Prince Rupert's cavalry dogs and how noble-bred poodles became instruments of terror on the battlefields of the English Civil War, make sure to subscribe to Fear Sermon and ring that notification bell. We bring you the darkest, most disturbing chapters of history that textbooks refuse to discuss. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our community of mystery seekers around the world. Now let's descend into one of the most bizarre and horrifying military experiments of the 17th century. England, 1642. The realm tears itself apart in civil war. King Charles I, believing in his divine right to rule, faces Parliament's challenge to his absolute authority. Brother turns against brother, father against son. The countryside becomes a chessboard where aristocratic cavalry clash with common foot soldiers, where ancient feudal loyalties collide with new ideas about governance and liberty. In this chaos rises Prince Rupert of the Rhine, nephew to King Charles, just 23 years old and already legendary for his tactical brilliance and frightening recklessness. Tall, dark-haired, with eyes that contemporaries described as black as coal and twice as burning, Rupert commands the royalist cavalry with a combination of continental military training and something else, something the parliamentarians whisper about in their camps at night. The prince never rides without his white poodle boy, not a lapdog, but a massive standard poodle standing nearly 3 feet at the shoulder, bred from French hunting lines, trained for, well, that's where the stories begin to diverge from comfortable truth. The aristocracy of the 1640s maintained a peculiar relationship with their dogs. These weren't pets in the modern sense. They were symbols of status, extensions of noble power, bred for specific purposes: hunting, guarding, fighting. The continental nobility, particularly the French and Germans from whom Rupert descended, had perfected the art of training large poodles, not for the ridiculous show cuts we know today, but as war dogs. Their intelligence made them trainable. Their size made them formidable. Their loyalty made them weapons. Rupert brought this knowledge to England, and he brought something else, a theory that would blur the line between military innovation and grotesque experimentation. In the winter of 1643, villagers near royalist strongholds began reporting strange occurrences. Livestock found dead, not from wolves. England had killed its last wolf decades before, but from something else. Dogs, they thought. But whose dogs? And why did the kills seem almost organized? The sheep weren't scattered in panic. They were separated, culled, taken down with precision that suggested intelligence beyond animal instinct. The whispers started in the alehouses and markets. Prince Rupert's cavalry wasn't just training horses, they were training something alongside them. Something that ran with the cavalry charges, something that hunted. Thomas Wickham, a wool merchant traveling between villages, provided this testimony to parliamentary investigators after his capture by royalist forces and subsequent escape. I heard them before I saw them, the thunder of hooves, yes, but also another sound, a breathing, panting, low to the ground. I dove into the hedgerow, and they passed within feet of me. The cavalry, yes, but between the horses, God help me, there were dogs, not running behind like hounds on a hunt. Running with them, matching pace, a dozen at least, all of that same French cut, all white or silver, and the riders weren't holding leads. The dogs ran in formation. When the cavalry turned, the dogs turned. When they stopped, the dogs stopped. It was as if they shared one mind. Wickham's testimony was dismissed as exaggeration. Stress of war, the parliamentary commanders said. Everyone knew Prince Rupert loved his dog boy, and perhaps some cavalry officers had begun emulating their commander by bringing dogs on campaign. Nothing more. But Wickham included a detail that the commanders didn't share with their soldiers. One of the dogs looked at me, directly at me in the hedgerow. I saw its eyes. It knew I was there. It chose not to alert its masters. And in that choice, I saw something that froze my blood. Calculation. Purpose. That dog was deciding whether I was worth hunting. It decided I wasn't. Not yet. February 1644. The Foxton Incident. A parliamentary scout unit, 12 men, disappeared while tracking royalist movements near Foxton village in Leicestershire. Their bodies were found 4 days later. The official parliamentary report, preserved in the archives at the British Library, states simply, killed in skirmish with enemy cavalry. But a letter from Captain James Hurt to his brother survives, hidden in the Hurt family papers, never submitted to official channels. They would have us believe the men died cleanly in combat, but I saw the bodies before they were burned. Edmund, I must tell someone, and you are my blood. Wounds were not from swords. Thomas Fletcher's throat was torn open, but the edges of the wound, they showed teeth marks. Not human, not wolf. Something in between in size. Richard Mosley's leg had been, I scarce can write it, had been worried away, the way a dog worries a bone, but with such force that the femur was exposed and cracked. Most disturbing of all was young Peter Grant. He had climbed a tree. We found him 15 feet up, his body wedged into the branches. His face showed such terror that even in death his features were twisted in horror. Whatever came for these men, Peter preferred to freeze to death in that tree, rather than face it on the ground. He died of exposure, Edmund, chose death by cold over whatever hunted him below. The letter continues. I spoke quietly with a shepherd who lives near where we found them. He claimed he heard the attack, heard men screaming, and beneath the screams he heard dogs. Not barking, growling, but growling in unison, he said, like a choir, like they were directed. He said it sounded like hell's own pack following orders from their devil master. Captain Hurt never sent another letter. He died 3 weeks later at the Battle of Newark. The family records indicate he requested transfer to London, away from field combat, in the days before his death. The request was denied. February 1644, the Grantham deserter, a royalist soldier named William Ashford, deserted his unit and sought refuge with parliamentary forces. His debriefing, conducted by Colonel Edward Rossiter, reveals the first direct testimony from within Prince Rupert's army. The prince keeps kennels, sirs. At every garrison he demands space for his kennels. I thought it was vanity, an aristocrat's indulgence in wartime. I was assigned to night watch at our Belvoir Castle garrison in January. I could hear them at night, the dogs. Poodles, yes, but bred large and trained harder than any hound I've ever seen. The prince has a master, a Frenchman named Claude Montfort, who works with them daily. This Montfort speaks to the dogs in French, but not as one speaks to animals. He speaks as a commander to soldiers. He teaches them signals, hand signals, whistle signals. And they learn, sirs. God help me, they learn like children learn. I watched him train them one morning. He had 6 dogs in the yard. He sent them across obstacles, walls, ditches, barriers. They moved together. When one struggled, the others would wait, then move forward as a unit. He would point at targets, scarecrows dressed as soldiers, and the dogs would attack on his signal. Not chaotically. They would circle, cut off retreat, and strike together. Throats, always the throats. But the part that drove me to desert, sirs, was this. He brought out a pig one morning, released it into the yard, then released 3 of the dogs. The pig ran, as pigs do. The dogs didn't chase immediately. They spread out, surrounded it, herded it toward a corner. Then, only then, did they attack. They hunted, sirs, with strategy, with planning. When they finished, Montfort called them back with a whistle. They came immediately, sat in formation before him, covered in the pig's blood, and waited for praise, which he gave them. He petted each one, spoke to each one, rewarded each one. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. He said in English so the watching soldiers would understand, "Good. Now you are ready for the Irish method." I asked another soldier what that meant. He told me about Ireland, where the English have used dogs in warfare before. Bloodhounds released ahead of soldiers to hunt native rebels through forests. But he said the prince has refined this, made it precise, made it tactical. I deserted that night, sirs, because I knew what they planned to use these dogs for. not against soldiers in open battle, against scouts, against civilians, against anyone who might see something the royalists want hidden. Ashford's testimony was buried. Colonel Rossiter noted in his private journal, "The man's story is too fantastical for official report. Would make Parliament a laughingstock, but I believe him. God help me, I believe every word." March 1644. The pattern emerges. By early March, parliamentary intelligence had documented 17 incidents of scouts, messengers, or small units disappearing, or being found dead with unusual wounds in areas where Prince Rupert's cavalry had recently operated. In 12 of those cases, witnesses reported seeing dogs accompanying the cavalry. In 8 cases, survivors or local civilians specifically described the dogs as poodles or French dogs. A report compiled by parliamentary spymaster Samuel Luke notes, "The enemy has developed a new auxiliary force. While we cannot confirm the full extent of their capability, we must assume the prince's dogs represent a deliberate tactical innovation. They provide early warning, they can pursue fleeing scouts faster than horses, and they are capable of lethal force against individual targets. We have no countermeasure." This was no longer rumor. This was military intelligence confirming that Prince Rupert's cavalry dogs had become weapons of war. And then came Newark, and the discovery that would reveal the full horror. If this story is giving you chills, hit that like button. It helps us bring more forgotten horrors to light. The next part of this investigation reveals exactly what parliamentary forces discovered about Prince Rupert's war dogs, and I promise you, the truth is darker than any fiction. Share this with someone who loves dark historical mysteries. Let's discover what happens next. March 17th, 1644. The Battle of Newark had ended. Prince Rupert's cavalry had broken through parliamentary lines in a devastating charge, but at cost. The royalists withdrew, leaving their dead and wounded behind, a rare occurrence that suggested their retreat was more desperate than tactical. Lieutenant Geoffrey Hale led the parliamentary detail tasked with securing the battlefield and tending to wounded. His official report, filed with the Committee of both Kingdoms, describes what happened next. At approximately 2 hours past dawn, my men encountered what we initially believed to be civilian casualties in a field approximately 1/4 mile from the main battle site. Upon closer inspection, we discovered 3 bodies, later identified as Robert Miller, a miller from nearby Balderton village, his wife Catherine, and their daughter Anne, aged 12 years. The nature of their deaths was immediately apparent and deeply disturbing. All 3 had suffered catastrophic injuries to the throat and major blood vessels. The wounds were consistent with animal attack, specifically canine. However, the pattern of the attack suggested pursuit and coordinated action, not random animal predation. Young Anne's body was found 30 yards from her parents, indicating she had been separated and run down individually. Her injuries showed defensive wounds on her hands and arms, suggesting she fought against her attacker. The size and spacing of the tooth marks indicated a large dog, considerably larger than a common hunting hound. Most disturbing was the discovery of Robert Miller's body. He had managed to partially scale a low stone wall before being pulled down. His hands showed severe lacerations consistent with clutching at stone, and his legs bore marks indicating he had been seized and dragged backward. The ferocity required to pull a full-grown man from a wall suggests either multiple animals or an animal of exceptional size and strength. But Hale's official report omits details he included in his personal diary, discovered by historians in the 1890s. "I have commanded men through 2 years of this damnable war. I have seen cavalry charges and artillery fire. I have watched men die in every manner that combat offers. But what I saw in that field shook something fundamental in my understanding of warfare. These were not combatants, they were a family fleeing the battle. And they were hunted, deliberately hunted. The tracks in the mud told a story no official report could include without inviting mockery. The family had fled south from the village, trying to reach the forest. But something had followed them, not horses, the hoof prints were distant. What followed them left paw prints, 4 sets of paw prints, large dogs running together. The prints showed they had spread out, flanking the family, herding them away from the forest and into open ground. The attack, when it came, was coordinated. 2 dogs took the parents. The prints showed this clearly, 2 sets converging on the adults while 2 others pursued the child. This was pack hunting behavior, but with a precision I've never seen in wild animals. And then we found the 5th set of prints, larger than the others. This animal had followed behind, had watched the attack unfold but hadn't participated. It had simply supervised. When my sergeant discovered these tracks, he said nothing. We both recognized what we were seeing, and we both knew we couldn't report it. Who would believe that Prince Rupert's cavalry had deliberately set their war dogs on fleeing civilians? Who would accept that these dogs had hunted with tactical precision? But then we found the dog. It was standing near Catherine Miller's body when we approached. A massive white poodle, easily 3 feet at the shoulder, with a coat matted with blood and mud. Around its neck was a leather collar studded with what appeared to be garnets or rubies, and hanging from that collar was a silver medallion bearing an engraved crest. Prince Rupert's crest. The animal didn't flee when we approached. It watched us. Sergeant Michaels raised his musket, but before he could fire, the dog turned and walked, not ran, walked toward the tree line. It moved with a confidence that was deeply unnatural. It knew we wouldn't follow. It knew we would be too shocked, too disturbed by what we'd found to pursue. At the tree line, it stopped and looked back at us. I swear before God that animal assessed us, decided we weren't a threat, then it disappeared into the trees. I ordered my men to burn the collar. We buried it in the mud. Whatever evidence it provided wasn't worth the questions it would raise, but I kept the medallion. I keep it still, though I wish I had buried it with the collar. Every time I see it, I remember those tracks in the mud. I remember the tactical precision, and I remember those eyes watching us from beneath that bloodied white coat. Those weren't the eyes of an animal. They were the eyes of a soldier evaluating enemy forces. The Miller family's deaths were officially attributed to misadventure during battle. The parliamentary command buried Hale's findings, but the investigation was far from over. The discovery at Newark forced parliamentary commanders to confront a question they had avoided for months. What exactly was Prince Rupert doing with his war dogs, and how far had his experimentation gone? Colonel Edward Montague, appointed to investigate the matter discreetly, began interviewing captured Royalist soldiers. His collected testimonies, preserved in the Montague papers at the British Library, paint a disturbing picture of systematic military innovation that crossed moral boundaries, even in an age of brutal warfare. The kennel system from the testimony of Henry Blackwood, a Royalist quartermaster captured at Newark. Every garrison maintained a kennel. Not optional, sir. Orders from the prince himself. Each kennel housed between 8 and 20 dogs, depending on the garrison's size. These weren't hunting dogs kept for sport. They were military assets, listed in our supply requisitions alongside horses, weapons, and powder. The dogs ate better than the common soldiers. Specific rations, meat primarily, raw meat, sometimes supplemented with grain, but mostly flesh. The prince's master of hounds, that Frenchman Montfort, insisted on this, said the dogs needed to maintain their taste for blood, their hunting instinct. Training occurred daily. Morning exercises before dawn, running alongside cavalry practice charges, learning to move with the horses, learning hand signals from the riders. The dogs would match pace with a galloping horse for up to 2 miles. Try understanding that, sir. These animals had endurance that matched their intelligence. Afternoon training was darker. We weren't supposed to watch, but word spreads in a garrison. Montfort would take the dogs to isolated areas. He used prisoners for training sometimes, not English prisoners, couldn't risk word getting out, but Irish prisoners, sometimes Scots, men who were marked for hanging anyway. He would release them, give them a head start, then release the dogs to track them. Said it was necessary to train them for real conditions. The dogs always found them, always, and the dogs learned to kill efficiently. Throats, always throats. Quick kills that silenced the target before they could raise alarm. Some men thought it was brilliant. Tactical innovation for scouts and night operations. Others, like myself, saw it for what it was, turning noble hunting animals into instruments of terror. But we said nothing. Prince Rupert was the king's nephew. His will was law in royalist territory. The selection process, not all poodles proved suitable. Montfort maintained strict selection criteria. From the testimony of James Wardell, a royalist stable master, the Frenchman tested each dog personally. He would evaluate intelligence first. Could the dog learn complex commands? Could it understand sequences of signals? Could it adapt to changing situations? Most dogs failed this test. Perhaps 1 in 5 poodles showed the intelligence required. Then came temperament testing. The dog needed to be aggressive towards strangers but absolutely loyal to its handler. It needed to attack on command but cease attack on command. This balance was rare. Perhaps 1 in 10 of the intelligent dogs possessed it. Finally came the crucial test. Could the dog hunt with other dogs without breaking formation? Dogs are pack animals, yes, but they usually established dominance hierarchies through conflict. Montfort needed dogs that would subordinate their individual instincts to tactical necessity. This was the rarest quality. Perhaps 1 in 20 dogs that reached this stage of testing passed. The dogs that passed all tests were marked with the prince's collar and integrated into cavalry units. The others were disposed of. Montfort said he couldn't risk having inferior dogs in the bloodline or the training program, said they would contaminate the behavior of the successful dogs. I witnessed one disposal, a dog that had shown promise but proved too independent during formation training. Montfort took it behind the kennels. Single pistol shot. He showed no emotion. Told me, a soldier who does not follow orders is worse than no soldier at all. Same for dogs. By the winter of 1644, the prince had perhaps 70 dogs that met his standards, 70 weapons that could think, that could hunt, that could kill on command. And they were being deployed. The first official acknowledgement on April 3, 1644. Parliament finally addressed the matter publicly. A declaration was read in the House of Commons. It has come to our attention that the forces of Prince Rupert have employed, in warfare, certain animals trained in methods both cruel and ungodly. Specifically, large dogs of French breeding have been observed accompanying cavalry units and participating in attacks upon His Majesty's loyal subjects. We declare such practices contrary to the customs of Christian warfare. The use of animals to hunt and attack human persons represents a degradation of military honor and a descent into barbarism unbecoming of English nobility. We call upon all commanders to report incidents involving these animals. Furthermore, we authorize our forces to dispatch any such animals found on the battlefield or in captured territory, without exception. The collars and insignia found upon these animals shall be preserved as evidence of the prince's unorthodox methods. But the declaration was too late. Prince Rupert's tactical innovation had already spread. The Irish Connection investigation revealed that Rupert's methods weren't entirely novel. England had used dogs in warfare before, particularly in Ireland. The difference was scale and sophistication. A report from Sir William Brereton, parliamentary commander in Cheshire, notes, "The use of hounds against Irish rebels is established practice dating to the 1570s. Bloodhounds were released ahead of troops to track rebels through forests and bogs. But these were simple tracking dogs, not tactical weapons. Prince Rupert has taken this concept and militarized it fully. His dogs don't simply track, they attack on command. They work in coordination with cavalry. They can distinguish between targets based on signals from handlers. This represents a fundamental evolution in the military application of animals. Moreover, Rupert has systematized the training. He hasn't simply collected hunting dogs and thrown them into battle. He has developed a training program, a selection process, a command structure. He has created, in essence, a canine auxiliary force. The implications are troubling. If this method proves effective, other commanders will adopt it. We may be witnessing the birth of a new form of warfare, one where trained animals become standard military assets, deployed not just for their natural abilities, but as thinking, trainable weapons. Brereton's concerns proved prescient, but not in the way he imagined. The turning point, the Battle of Marston Moor in July 1644, changed everything. Prince Rupert suffered a devastating defeat. His cavalry was broken, and in the chaos of retreat, the dogs were left behind. Parliamentary forces captured 12 of Rupert's war dogs. The dogs were brought to London for examination. A committee was formed to study them, to understand what made them different from ordinary animals. Dr. Thomas Winston, physician and member of the committee, recorded his observations. These animals are remarkable specimens. Physically, they show breeding for size and strength unusual in their type, but more striking is their behavior. They respond to commands in French, German, and English. They understand complex hand signals. When one handler gives a signal, all nearby dogs respond in coordination, suggesting they've been trained not as individuals but as units. Most disturbing is their demeanor toward humans. A typical dog, even a guard dog, shows some natural affection toward people, or at least tolerance. These animals show neither. They regard humans with what I can only describe as professional detachment. They assess. They watch. They wait. I attempted to approach one animal, a large white male, with food. The dog did not take the food. Instead, it maintained eye contact with me, ignoring the offered meat. When I extended my hand further, it didn't growl or bark. It simply shifted its weight, preparing to move. A threat assessment, a tactical decision. These are not dogs as we understand them. They are weapons that happen to be housed in canine bodies. And the question we must now answer is, What do we do with weapons we cannot safely deploy? Parliament's answer was swift and brutal. On August 12, 1644, all captured war dogs were destroyed. The executions were carried out quietly, behind Tower of London walls, away from public view. Some MPs argued for preservation, for study. But the majority feared the dogs too much. The official explanation was disease. The dogs, it was said, carried contagion that might spread to London's dog population. In truth, Parliament feared something more intangible. They feared what these animals represented, the boundaries that had been crossed, the future that had been glimpsed. Prince Rupert's response: the prince never publicly acknowledged his dog program. After Marston Moor, references to the war dogs largely disappeared from royalist communications. Some historians believe he was ordered by King Charles to cease the program. The negative publicity was damaging to the royalist cause, particularly among moderate supporters who found the dog attacks distasteful. But private correspondence suggests Rupert never abandoned his belief in the method. A letter from Prince Rupert to his brother Prince Maurice, dated September 1644, hints at his thinking. The cavalry dogs proved their worth in a dozen engagements before political concerns curtailed their deployment. Future conflicts will see their resurrection. The advantage they provide, speed, stealth, terror, cannot be ignored simply because they disturb the sensibilities of men who have never faced battle. War is evolution. Tactics that succeed are adopted. Tactics that fail are discarded. The dogs succeeded. Their failure was political, not tactical, and political failures can be overcome. His infamous dog Boy was killed at the Battle of Marston Moor, shot, according to parliamentary propaganda, by a soldier who claimed the dog was a witch's familiar. Rupert was reportedly devastated. Some historians argue this personal loss, combined with the tactical defeat, finally ended his fascination with war dogs. Others aren't so sure. The legal aftermath: no one was ever prosecuted for the Miller family's deaths. The chaos of war made attribution impossible, and by the time investigations concluded, larger political concerns had overtaken the specific incident. However, the case did influence later military law. When Parliament established the new model army in 1645, regulations explicitly prohibited the deployment of animals trained to attack human persons except in cases of siege defense or guard duty. This was among the first codified rules limiting animal use in warfare, a direct response to Prince Rupert's experiments. The regulation remained in English military law for over 2 centuries, only being removed in the 1850s during revisions to modernize the Articles of War. Prince Rupert's cavalry dogs represent a disturbing chapter in the history of military innovation, one where the line between tactical brilliance and moral transgression became dangerously blurred. The precedent of weaponized animals, the systematic training of dogs for tactical military operations, wasn't invented by Prince Rupert. Ancient armies used war elephants. Medieval forces employed horses not just for transport but as weapons in their own right. Destriers trained to kick and bite enemy infantry. The Spanish conquistadors used mastiffs against indigenous populations in the Americas. But Rupert's innovation was different in critical ways. He didn't simply deploy animals for their natural physical advantages. He developed a training program that exploited animal intelligence to create something closer to auxiliary soldiers than traditional war animals. His dogs could receive and execute complex commands. They could work in coordination with human units. They could make tactical decisions within the parameters of their training. This represented a philosophical shift. Animals weren't just being used. They were being weaponized in a way that recognized and exploited their cognitive capabilities. And this raised questions that persist to the present day. When does the use of animals in warfare cross from acceptable practice to moral violation? What responsibilities do we bear toward animals we train to kill? The psychology of fear. Parliamentary propaganda heavily emphasized the dog attacks, using them to portray royalists as barbaric and cruel. This was effective precisely because dogs held a unique psychological position in English society. They were companion animals, symbols of loyalty and nobility. The aristocracy prided itself on the quality of its hunting hounds. Dogs appeared in family portraits, were given elaborate tombstones, were mourned publicly. Transforming these symbols of loyalty into instruments of terror created a powerful psychological weapon. The testimony of parliamentary soldiers repeatedly mentions the unnatural feeling of being hunted by dogs. The animals violated expectations. They turned something familiar and trusted into something dangerous and alien. Modern military psychologists recognize this as a form of cognitive warfare, using violations of expectation to create disproportionate psychological impact. The actual casualties from dog attacks were minimal compared to conventional warfare. But the fear and disgust they generated were substantial. Prince Rupert understood this instinctively. His dogs weren't primarily intended to inflict casualties. They were force multipliers that enhanced the psychological impact of cavalry operations. They made his forces seem more dangerous, more unpredictable, more willing to violate norms. In an era when warfare still maintained certain chivalric pretensions, this was a significant tactical advantage. Similar cases in history, Prince Rupert's dogs weren't an isolated incident. They were part of a long history of controversial animal use in warfare. During the Spanish conquest of the Americas, conquistadors deployed mastiffs and greyhounds against indigenous populations. These dogs were trained specifically to attack and kill humans. Contemporary accounts describe coordinated attacks where dogs would be released ahead of soldiers to break enemy formations through sheer terror. The practice was so effective and so brutal that it drew criticism even from some Spanish clergy, though this didn't halt its use. In the American Civil War, both Union and Confederate forces used dogs for guard duty and scout tracking. There are scattered reports, never officially confirmed, of dogs being trained to attack escaped slaves or enemy scouts. The practice was common enough that regulations were discussed, though never formally implemented. During World War II, the Soviet Union attempted to train anti-tank dogs carrying explosives to run under German tanks. The program was a tactical failure. The dogs often ran toward Soviet tanks instead of German ones, but it represented the same philosophical approach, exploiting animal behavior for military advantage regardless of ethical considerations. Modern military working dogs serve in detection roles, explosives, drugs, mines, and patrol roles, but their use is heavily regulated. They're not trained to kill, they're trained to detect, alert, and apprehend. The line established partly in response to cases like Prince Rupert's has held, at least officially, for over a century. The scientific legacy Rupert's training methods, though developed for military purposes, contributed to broader understanding of animal cognition and training. The recognition that dogs could learn complex tactical concepts, could understand sequences of commands, could work in coordinated units. This represented sophisticated insight into canine intelligence decades before formal animal psychology emerged as a discipline. Claude Montfort, the Frenchman who served as Rupert's master of hounds, left no published writings. But his methods, passed through military channels adapted for civilian purposes, influenced the development of modern dog training. The use of hand signals, the emphasis on immediate positive reinforcement, the understanding of dogs as social animals whose pack instincts could be exploited for cooperative behavior. These concepts, now standard in dog training, have lineages that trace back to military applications like Rupert's. This creates an uncomfortable reality. Some of our modern understanding of how to train assistance dogs, therapy dogs, search and rescue dogs derives from experimental programs designed to create canine weapons. The question of accountability: no one was ever held legally responsible for the Miller family's deaths or any other civilian casualties involving Rupert's war dogs. The English Civil War ended in 1651 with royalist defeat. Prince Rupert fled to the continent, eventually returning to England after the monarchy was restored in 1660. He lived until 1682, dying at age 62, respected as an elder statesman and military innovator. The historical record treats his cavalry dogs as a curious footnote, an eccentric experiment that ultimately failed. The human cost is rarely mentioned. The Miller family's names appear in local parish records, their deaths noted simply as occurring during the Troubles. Their story would have been lost entirely if not for Lieutenant Hale's private diary. This raises troubling questions about how we remember military innovation. When does tactical brilliance excuse moral transgression? How do we balance recognition of strategic insight against the human cost of experimentation? The English Civil War was brutal by any measure, perhaps 200,000 dead in a nation of 5 million. Do 3 more deaths, 3 civilians killed by dogs instead of swords or muskets, really merit particular attention? The answer, perhaps, is that they do precisely because they weren't deaths in battle. They were the result of calculated decision-making to deploy weapons that couldn't distinguish combatant from civilian, that couldn't be controlled once released, that transformed warfare from an activity governed, however imperfectly, by codes and customs into something more primal and savage. The modern echo today's militaries face similar questions about autonomous weapons, about AI-guided systems, about technologies that remove human judgment from the immediate moment of lethal action. The debates echo those from 1644. When does tactical advantage become moral liability? What boundaries should limit military innovation? Who bears responsibility when weapons exceed their intended constraints? Prince Rupert's cavalry dogs were, in a sense, the 17th century equivalent of autonomous weapons, intelligent systems that could identify, pursue, and neutralize targets with minimal human supervision. The fact that they were biological rather than mechanical is almost beside the point. The fundamental question was the same. Should we create weapons that can make life or death decisions without immediate human control? England in 1644 said no. The prohibition wasn't absolute or perfectly enforced, but it established a principle. Some innovations, regardless of their tactical utility, cross boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. Some weapons, regardless of how effective they might be, threaten something fundamental about how we understand warfare and our relationship to violence. Whether modern societies will maintain similar boundaries remains to be seen. The English Civil War ended. Prince Rupert's cavalry dogs disappeared from the battlefield. But the questions they raised, about innovation and morality, about tactical advantage and human cost, about the boundaries we maintain, even in the midst of organized violence, those questions remain with us. What do you think drove Prince Rupert to develop such a controversial weapon system? Was it pure tactical thinking, divorced from moral consideration? Was it the aristocratic mindset that saw animals as tools to be exploited without restraint? Or was it something darker, a fascination with control, with creating obedient killers who would follow orders without question? And what about Claude Montfort, the French master of hounds who developed the training methods? History records almost nothing about him beyond his role in Rupert's army. Did he see himself as an innovator, a scientist exploring animal cognition? Or did he understand exactly what he was creating and simply not care? Leave your theories in the comments below. Tell us what you think about the ethics of using animals in warfare. Should modern militaries employ animals in combat roles, or does that cross a line that should remain inviolate? If you found this lost chapter of history as disturbing as we did, subscribe to Fear Sermon for more stories about the dark experiments, forgotten horrors, and moral transgressions hidden in history's shadows. We bring you the stories textbooks won't tell, the ones that reveal uncomfortable truths about human nature and the things we're willing to do when we convince ourselves that victory justifies any method. Ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. We release new videos every week, diving deep into historical mysteries that challenge what we think we know about the past. Share this video with anyone fascinated by military history, animal behavior, or the moral questions that warfare raises. The more people who know these stories, the better equipped we are to recognize when history might be repeating itself. Thank you for joining us on this investigation. Remember, the past isn't dead. It's not even past. The decisions made in 1644 echo in choices we face today about autonomous weapons, about artificial intelligence in warfare, about the boundaries we maintain when survival seems to demand we cross them. See you in the next video, where we'll explore another dark chapter from history's hidden archives. Until then, stay curious, stay skeptical, and never stop questioning the stories we tell about who we are and what we're capable of.